Dawn rose over the frontier like an old man stretching his bones, slow and creaking, letting the first hush of gold spill across the plains. The world did not wake all at once. It unfurled the way secrets do, a little light on the sagebrush, a shimmer over the river, a whisper of pink along the distant hills. And through that fragile morning, a single figure moved, wrapped in a long, rough burlap sack cloak, the wind tugging at its edges as if trying to carry it away. Small footsteps, careful as prayer, a shadow that kept its head low, its dreams lower. The townsfolk had a name for her, a sharp, careless name that fit their tongues more easily than kindness. They called her the beast in the sack. Even the sunrise seemed to pause when she walked by, as though unsure whether to warm her or keep its distance. She did not lift her eyes. She rarely did. She walked as if each step carried weight beneath it. Memories, perhaps, or the lingering bruise of old insults. But to the quiet land around her, she moved like a ghost the earth had decided to shelter. To the wind, she was a gentle hum in its endless song. To the sky, a small, stubborn mark refusing to be erased. Her name was Mara Ellery, but almost no one in that dusty little town remembered that. Mara lived on the outskirts, not quite welcomed, not entirely gone. Her home was a small cabin leaning ever so slightly toward the east, as if trying to bow out of existence. Wild sage grew thick around the porch, hiding it from the main road. It suited her. She did not want the world to look too closely. She had learned long ago what happened when it did. Inside, the cabin smelled of dried lavender and worn wood, and everything was arranged with careful hands. Mara moved as though she were afraid to disturb the quiet. Maybe she was. Silence was the only thing that never judged her. Every morning, she walked into town before most folks were awake. She fetched water. She bought the smallest things: flour, a strip of cloth, a handful of herbs. She waited for moments when the shop was nearly empty. She didn't linger. The sack cloak draped around her was thick and shapeless, its coarse threads brushing against her wrists like the remnants of a past she never spoke about. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't meant to be, but she held on to it as one might hold on to armor, because once she had needed protection, and clothes woven from heartbreak do not fall away easily. The townsfolk whispered. They always whispered. Some said she carried curses in her pockets. Some said she'd clawed a man in the dark. Some said she'd wandered out of the desert like a spirit searching for vengeance. And with each passing year, the stories grew stranger, louder, sharper. Yet the truth was quieter than all of them. The truth usually is. Still, to those who never bothered to listen, Mara became the creature they named her. Mothers gently pulled their children closer when she approached. Shopkeepers kept one eye on her and one hand near the edge of the counter, as if expecting her to break something precious. It hurt her, though she never let the hurt show. Pain can be buried. It just grows roots when you do. She wasn't always this hidden thing. Once, in the earlier years no one cared to remember, she used to smile. She used to braid wildflowers into her hair. She used to walk through the town square at dusk like she belonged among the laughter drifting through saloon windows. Before the sack, before the name, before him, Elias Crowley. His name still echoed in her memories like a splinter left under the skin. A rancher with sunburnt charm and a grin that fooled more hearts than it deserved. Elias had once looked at Mara like she was made of golden morning, and Mara, soft-hearted and hopeful, believed him. Before the world stripped her faith bare. Before he did, Elias loved the idea of her, not the truth. He loved her smile, not the reasons behind it. He loved her softness, not the strength it took to keep it. And when life tested her, when grief came and shadows clung to her like vines, he stepped back as though her sadness were a stain that might spread to him. He didn't help her. He didn't hold her. He didn't stay. He mocked the cloak she had begun to wear during the hardest winter, a sack she'd thrown over herself during a desperate night of cold and despair, too grief-numbed to look for anything else. The sack she kept afterward because it felt like a shield between her and the world. Elias laughed at it, laughed at her, said she looked like a wandering beast. The name stuck quicker than truth ever could. After that, She withdrew. Her laughter folded inward. Her steps grew quieter. Her heart, however, did not harden, and that was perhaps the bravest part of her. Not everyone treated her poorly. Not everyone knew how. There was Aunt Rilla, a woman shaped by age and stubborn kindness. Her hands trembled like leaves, but her eyes held storms and wisdom both. She had known Mara's mother long ago and felt a sense of duty that grew into affection. "Child," she would whisper whenever Mara visited, "you don't owe the world your wounds." Tommy, the young boy who roamed the edge of town with scraped knees and dreams too big for his pockets, always waved at Mara with both hands. He wasn't afraid of her. He thought her cloak looked like something a traveling wizard might wear. Mara never corrected him. She liked the innocence of the idea. Sheriff Hale, distant but fair, tipped his hat whenever their paths crossed. He never forced a conversation. He respected her quiet, a rare thing. His silence felt gentler than the words of most. These were the small threads of comfort woven into her days. Fragments of human gentleness she tucked away like fragile treasures. But still, each morning, people whispered. They stared. They judged. And Mara walked through it all with the soft endurance of a candle protecting its own flame. This particular morning, though, the one where dawn bent its head in sympathy, something felt different. There was a heaviness in the air, as though the horizon were holding its breath. Mara noticed it as she approached the river, where she always paused before entering town. The river was still, wearing the sunrise like an old shawl. Mara knelt beside it, cupping cool water into her palms. When she lifted her gaze, her reflection stared back, fragmented by ripples, unfamiliar even to herself. Her heart whispered questions she never dared to speak aloud. How long must I hide? How long must I carry their name for me? Will anyone ever see the truth beneath this cloak? The wind shifted, brushing against her cheeks like a mother's hand. The world around her softened in that instant. The river glimmered. The sky breathed. Somewhere a lark began to sing. And in that fragile morning light, something inside Mara stirred. Not hope, not yet, but the faint echo of something that remembered hope's shape. As she stood, the narrator of her life, the land itself, seemed to whisper. Sometimes the world names you before it knows you. Sometimes it sees only the shadows you walk through, and not the light you carried to survive them. But the heart waits. It waits for someone who looks deeper than the scars, than the stories, than the sack the world mocked into legend. Mara pulled the rough fabric closer around herself and stepped toward town. She did not know it yet. How could she? But the quiet trail she walked that morning was leading her straight toward the man, whose eyes would one day see her fully, the man who would name her heart instead of her wounds. And as she disappeared into the growing light, the story breathed its first promise, that even a soul wrapped in burlap is still worthy of being held gently. The day after that tender, trembling sunrise, the plains carried a different sort of sigh. Not heavy, not ominous, just a soft shifting, like destiny turning its head, noticing something it had long overlooked. Dust lifted from the trail in slow, swirling ribbons, each gust revealing the faint outline of a rider approaching the town. His horse was a calm, chestnut creature, hooves meeting the earth with a rhythm steady enough to soothe even the wary wind. And the man atop it, he didn't move like the others. Most cowboys rode the way thunder sounds, loud, bragging, claiming the horizon as theirs. Their arrivals were storms made of leather and spurs. But this one came like dusk settling over a tired day. Quiet, unhurried, a presence shaped more by silence than swagger. His name, though no one in town knew it yet, was Rowan Hart, a man whose past was written in soft scars and long pauses. A man who carried gentleness the way others carried guns, close and ready. The townsfolk would later say they felt something shift when Rowan crossed the old wooden bridge into Willow Bend, though none could name what it was. They'd just glance around as he passed, as if realizing the air had changed color. He rode through the main street with eyes that observed without taking. The kind of eyes that could look at a stranger and see their story without judging the shape of it. Rowan's first glimpse of Mara came at the well near the mercantile. She was pouring water into a battered tin pail, her sack cloak pulled close around her shoulders, the morning sun catching the stray strands of hair that escaped her hood. She moved with the quiet grace of someone who had learned long ago how to make herself small. Rowan was still in the saddle, but his hands loosened on the reins. Something about her drew him, not with force, not with sudden fascination, but with the gentle curiosity of a man witnessing something fragile and familiar. She didn't notice him, or maybe she did and simply pretended not to. It was hard to tell. What Rowan knew was this. There was a heaviness around her, like a life lived in apology. He had seen that weight before, carried it once too. The kind forged not by failure, but by the cruelty of others. He dismounted a few feet away, not wanting to startle her. The morning was quiet except for the creak of the well rope. He didn't speak, didn't approach. He simply let his presence rest near hers like a gentle breeze. And for a fleeting second, Mara paused, barely, but enough, as if she felt someone noticing her in a way that wasn't harsh. A way she hadn't felt in a long, aching while. She tightened her grip on the pail and walked away. Rowan didn't follow. He just watched the distance she put between herself and the world, wondering who had taught her to fear being seen. Rowan spent his first day in Willow Bend observing the patterns of the town. He tied his horse outside the saloon, tipped his hat to the barkeep, and ordered nothing stronger than water. He watched the dancing dust motes, the slow sway of the swinging doors, the tired conversation of old ranch hands. He learned without asking, listened without demanding, and in the quiet corners of his attention, he kept noticing Mara, how she never stayed anywhere long, how she drifted like smoke that expected to be blown away, how people watched her with a mix of pity and superstition. He didn't ask about the name they called her. Not yet. Some names are knives. It is cruel to pick one up without understanding the blood on it. Their next encounter came 2 days later. Mara struggled with a heavy sack of grain outside the mercantile. Her fingers, worn from years of chores and silence, trembled beneath the weight. The sack slipped just a little, enough to tilt her balance. Rowan stepped forward, not abruptly, but like a man who'd spent years learning to move gently in a world full of wounded creatures. "Let me help you." His voice wasn't loud or commanding. It was low and steady, like a river talking to itself. Mara froze. She stiffened as if expecting mockery, judgment, or some cruel remark wrapped in a false offer. She had endured those before. Rowan didn't press. He didn't reach. He simply waited, showing with his stillness that he meant no harm. When Mara gave the faintest nod, Rowan lifted the sack with ease and placed it across her small cart. No flourish, no show of strength, just an act of kindness done quietly enough not to frighten her. "Thank you." Her voice barely more than breath. He nodded once, and nothing more. Kindness, when real, doesn't require a sentence. But Elias Crowley was watching. Of course he was. Men like Elias always watched when someone else dared to notice what they had once taken for granted. Elias leaned against the post, chewing on a piece of straw, eyes narrowed. He carried pride the way others carried sickness, contagious and heavy. As Rowan walked past him, Elias smirked. "Careful, stranger. She ain't what she looks like. Folks call her the beast in the sack for a reason." His voice carried that careless cruelty of someone who enjoyed shaping a tale at someone else's expense. Mara heard him. She always heard. Pain sharpens hearing. Rowan paused, not bristling, not angry, just steady. "Strange," he said softly, "how a man judges what he never tried to understand." And in that simple sentence, the wind changed direction. Elias's jaw tightened. His pride cracked just a little. His jealousy began to settle like sand in water. That would not be the last time those two men stood on opposite sides of truth. Rowan didn't chase Mara after that. He didn't hover or intrude. He simply showed up in small, unthreatening ways, helping her lift her water buckets at the well, letting her move ahead of him in line, riding his horse a few paces behind her on long, lonely stretches of road, Not close enough to imply ownership, but close enough to imply safety. These moments were wisps of connection, barely formed. Not love, not even affection. Just two quiet souls circling the edges of each other's loneliness. Mara noticed him. She noticed everything. But she didn't quite know what to do with a man who asked for nothing. A man who watched her without wanting to shape her into anything else. A man who didn't look through her or around her, but at her, softly, respectfully. It was confusing, almost painful, to be treated as if she mattered. Aunt Rilla noticed too. She always did. That cowboy's got a gentle way about him, she said one evening as Mara carried a basket of herbs into Rilla's home. The old woman's voice trembled with age, but strengthened with knowing. Don't run from a kindness just because the world forgot how to offer it. Mara lowered her gaze. People don't change, she whispered. Rilla smiled with sad, wise eyes. Oh, child, they do. Sometimes the world just doesn't let them begin. It was the longest conversation Mara had had about Rowan, and even then, she said almost nothing. Words felt dangerous, like stepping toward a cliff without knowing the ground. Little Tommy, bold as ever, tugged at Mara's sleeve days later. Miss Mara, that quiet cowboy likes you. She nearly dropped the small jar she was holding. Tommy giggled and ran off before she found any way to respond. Children had a way of throwing truth like pebbles into still water, and Rowan kept noticing her with that same gentle steadiness, that same unspoken patience, not demanding her trust, not assuming anything, just being there. Sometimes that is more intimate than love itself. One evening, as Mara walked home under a lavender sky, Rowan rode beside her. Not close, not far, just enough for their shadows to touch occasionally. He didn't speak. She didn't ask him to. They traveled like two melodies searching for the same song. The wind hummed. The plains breathed. The sky dimmed into dusk. And in that shared silence, something delicate began to unfurl inside Mara, like a small, trembling bloom finding the courage to meet the sun again. She didn't look at Rowan. Rowan didn't push for her gaze. But their hearts, those quiet, wounded hearts, took notice of each other. And somewhere beyond the horizon, fate stirred like a horse about to gallop. The connection had begun, soft as breath, slow as forgiveness, and deeper than either of them yet understood. The storm did not arrive suddenly. It crept in, the way truth often does, gathering itself at the edges of the sky, stretching dark fingers across the fading blue. Clouds rolled low and heavy over the plains, whispering warnings in a language only the wind understood. By late afternoon, the air tasted of metal and memory. Flint-gray light pressed against the horizon. Horses refused to settle. Chickens scattered beneath porches. Even the river held its breath. Mara felt the storm before she saw it. Some people sensed danger. Others sensed loneliness. She sensed storms, the kind outside and the kind inside too. She had gone into town for a handful of dried herbs, caught between wanting to avoid the crowds and wanting to pretend she didn't hear the creeping thunder. By the time she stepped out of the mercantile, rain had begun its first hesitant descent. A cold drop touched her cheek, slid like a tear she hadn't cried. Then another, and another. The sky cracked open. Mara clutched her sack cloak around her body and began the long walk home. The rain hit her with the persistence of old memories demanding to be felt. The wind pushed at her back as though urging her to move faster. But the storm outpaced her. It swallowed the road, blurred the hills, drowned the world. Her breath came sharp, her steps unsteady. The weight of the soaked burlap dragged at her shoulders. Lightning sliced the sky. The thunder that followed shook her bones. She stumbled. The earth beneath her feet slick with mud and old sorrow. For a heartbeat, she thought of curling into herself, letting the rain wash everything away. But then came the sound of hooves. Steady, familiar, a rhythm she knew even if she had never learned to trust it fully. Rowan Hart emerged through the veil of rain like a memory that refused to die. His horse moved carefully, its coat darkened by the storm. Rowan's hat was pulled low, his coat flung around him like a second skin. He rode toward her with the urgency of someone who had feared he might be too late. Mara, He breathed, barely audible under the roar of wind. It wasn't a question, just the relief of a man who'd found what he hadn't realized he was searching for. She took a step back, not out of fear, but habit, the instinct of someone in used a rescue. Rowan dismounted, boots sinking into mud. "You'll catch your death out here." His voice held no scolding, only worry shaped into sound. The storm pushed them both. Rain pounded against their skin, cold enough to sting. Rowan glanced around, then pointed toward the distant outline of an old, abandoned barn at the edge of the fields. "Come on, the roof there might still hold." He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't pull her along. He simply walked at her side, shielding her from the worst of the wind with his body. Together, they battled the storm step by step, like two secrets trying not to be drowned. The barn was a faded skeleton of wood and rusted nails, leaning against the fury of the storm with stubborn defiance. Rowan pushed open its swollen door, guiding Mara inside. The space smelled of old hay and forgotten summers. Rain hammered the roof like restless fingers searching for a way in. Rowan exhaled slowly, the sound almost lost in the storm. "Sit here," he said softly, gesturing toward a dry patch of ground near a stack of hay. Mara hesitated, not because she feared him, but because the closeness of this moment felt dangerous in a different way. Vulnerability had always frightened her more than storms. But the cold seeped deeper into her bones. And Rowan's presence, steady, careful, felt like the first safe place she'd known in years. She sat. He started a small fire, coaxing it with practiced hands until a soft orange glow warmed the space. For a long stretch of silence, they simply listened to the rain pounding its story against the barn. The flames flickered. Shadows danced over the worn wood. Mara held her soaked cloak close. Rowan sat a respectful distance away, letting the fire speak for him. Then gently he asked, "Why do you wear that?" He didn't gesture to her sack, didn't insult it, didn't mock what others mocked. He just asked, softly, as if the question itself was a fragile thing he hoped she wouldn't fear. Mara stared into the fire. The shadows across her face looked like bruises born of memories. After a long moment, she answered. Her voice trembled at first, then steadied, the way a bird trembles before taking flight. "I wore it one winter night. The cold came early that year, and I had nothing thick enough to fight it. The only thing in my home that could trap the heat was a grain sack. I wrapped myself in it, thinking it would be only for a few hours." Her fingers brushed the rough fabric. But the next day, people saw it, and they laughed. Elias laughed the loudest. Rowan's jaw tightened, but he didn't interrupt. "I kept wearing it because I needed something between me and them. Something that reminded me I didn't have to show the parts of me that hurt." She swallowed, her throat tight. It became the only place I felt hidden. Rowan's voice was low, almost reverent. Hidden isn't the same as safe. Mara closed her eyes. No one had ever told her that. No one had ever cared enough to. And the storm outside, fierce moments ago, sounded suddenly smaller, as though the barn itself leaned closer to listen. Rowan shifted slightly, hands resting on his knees. "I know what it is to hide behind something." His words came slow, as if dragged from a place he rarely visited. "Lost my wife 4 winters ago. Fever took her fast. One day, she was laughing at my terrible cooking, and the next, she was fading. By the time I rode for help, she was already slipping away." The fire crackled softly between them. "After she died, I stopped talking, stopped smiling, stopped believing the world held anything worth holding." He looked at his hands, large, weathered, gentle. "I traveled to outrun the memories. But all I did was outrun myself. Silence became my shelter, safer than feeling." And in that moment, Mara understood him in a way she had never understood anyone. They shared the same kind of ache, the kind that doesn't scream. It whispers. It erodes. It teaches you to disappear. Rowan's next words were barely breath. "You're not the only one who wears armor that hurts." It was then, only then, that Mara felt something shift inside her. A tenderness she had not allowed herself for years. A warmth not born from fire, but from being seen. Not pitted, not judged. Seen. As the storm softened into steady rain, The barn felt warmer, closer, safe in a way Mara had forgotten safety could feel. Rowan reached toward her, not touching, not assuming, just offering his coat. "Take it. You're freezing." She hesitated. He waited. Finally, she draped the coat around her shoulders. It smelled of cedar and dust and honesty. It settled around her like a promise. For a moment, their hands brushed. A brief, trembling touch. Not a spark, something quieter. A recognition, a gentle remembering of what it meant to be human in someone else's presence. They sat together while the fire dimmed, while the rain softened to a lullaby, while time stretched itself into something soft and merciful. No declarations, no confessions, just breathing the same warm air, letting their wounds rest beside each other without fear. Sometimes love begins not with lightning, but with two people finally learning that they don't have to be alone in their storms. When dawn returned, pale and trembling, they stepped out of the barn. The world glittered with fresh rain. Weeds stood taller. The earth smelled rich and alive. They walked back toward town side by side, not touching, not speaking, but a thread stretched gently between them. Elias saw them near the main road. His eyes darkened, jealousy pooling in them like tar. Rowan didn't notice him. Mara did, but for the first time in years, she didn't lower her gaze. And somewhere deep inside, something brave whispered. Not this time. The narrator, the land itself, murmured as they walked. Some hearts break because they never learn to feel, but some break because they finally do. And the storm had done more than test them. It had softened the ground, made room for something new to grow, something neither of them yet knew they were ready for, but something that moved toward them, as gently as two quiet souls daring to hope again. Dawn rose slow over Blackthorn Ridge, the sky a soft bruise of lavender and gold, as if the heavens themselves were waking from a long night of remembering. And in that hush, in that tender blue before the sun claimed the earth, Tess stood alone outside the sheriff's office, her hands wrapped around her own arms, as if holding herself stable in a world still trembling beneath her feet. The townsfolk watched from a distance, not close enough to touch, but near enough to feel the echo of everything she had lived through. Every lie, every shadow, every cruel name whispered behind her back. The beast in the sack, a title stitched from fear, from shallow hearts, from folks who had never once sat close enough to see the gentleness in her eyes. The kind that only grows in people who have survived the unthinkable. But today she stood tall, like a spirit finally freed from the skin of an animal she never was. The cell door creaked open behind her, and second man, quiet Sam Hawthorne, stepped out, not as a savior, not as a knight bathed in glory, but as a man still dusted with the fear of almost losing someone who had begun to pulse inside his own heart. He carried no badge, no gun, only the quiet sadness of a man who had seen death pass close, and had decided he would not waste a single heartbeat more on silence. Tess turned, and their eyes met, not with romance, not yet, but with a soft gratitude, the kind that grows between people who have held one another through storms. Even without touching, Sam breathed out her name like a prayer. Tess. And though he said it plain, no lace, no poetry, it carried the weight of an entire future he was only beginning to admit he wanted. She looked down at her hands, their trembling finally easing. "I thought they wouldn't believe me." Her voice barely more than wind against the morning. Sam stepped closer, slow, respectful, as if approaching a wild-hearted creature who had been hunted too long. They listened in the end. That's what matters. A small laugh spilled from her, thin and shaky, like a newborn foal attempting its first step. "No, Sam. You listened. You were the first to ever do that." A wave of quiet passed between them. Not romantic, not desperate, just honest, just human. Behind them, the townsfolk hesitated, whispers churning like low thunder. Some held guilt, some held shame, some held nothing but stubborn pride, unable to admit they had been wrong. Marshal Benton, stern and tired, walked forward, clearing his throat the way old lawmen do when they want to speak softly but don't quite remember how. Miss Hale, I reckon we owe you something. An apology. A public one. On account of the lies that near cost you your life. A hush rolled through the street. The kind that shakes dust loose from beams. The kind that marks the beginning of change. Tess looked at all of them. Faces once twisted by fear, now softened by truth. She took a long breath. The kind that reaches the bones. I don't want anything from you. She said it gently. Not bitter. Not vengeful. Just tired. I only want to live like a person again. Marshall Benton's eyes dropped. Shame warmed his weathered cheeks. You have that right. And more. Tess nodded. And with that simple movement, the crowd exhaled, as if the whole town had been holding its breath since the day they first named her monster. From the back of that crowd, one man stood alone. The first man, Connor Tate, the rancher, the one who had once courted her, not out of kindness, but out of convenience. A man who had seen her strength and mistaken it for something dangerous. A man who now looked smaller than she remembered, as if guilt had shrunk him from the inside. He tried to approach, but Tess lifted a hand. Gentle, polite, firm. Connor, there's nothing left to say. I hope you find a way to be better than the fear that's been eating you. But I won't carry your regret for you. Connor swallowed, his voice breaking like old wood. I'm sorry, Tess. I truly am. I was wrong. She offered him a soft nod. Mercy, not acceptance, and then turned away, because some wounds close not with conversation, but with the simple act of walking forward. And she did, one slow step at a time, toward the golden edge of the morning. Sam followed a pace behind her, not leading, not chasing, simply walking in her weather, the way a steady man does when he wants someone to know, I'll be here if you want me, but you don't owe me anything. When they reached the end of the street, she stopped again, looking out at the open land, the horizon blooming like a promise. Sam, she whispered, her voice a fragile ribbon, slipping free after too many years tied tight. Why did you help me? Really? He shifted, boots scuffing against packed earth. Because I've seen fear swallow good people, and I've seen truth save them. And when you walked into my office with your story, I saw someone worth saving. Not because you were weak, but because you were strong enough to ask for help. Her breath caught, just a flicker, just enough to soften something that had been stone inside her for too long. And you? Sam continued quietly. Who saved you before today? Tess blinked, and for the first time since childhood, she felt the sting of tears she wasn't ashamed of. Nobody. I guess I learned to save myself. One scraped knee at a time. Sam nodded, a slow, thoughtful bow of the head. Then maybe it's time you had someone who stands with you. Not in front, not behind, just beside. A small smile, barely there, but real. Touch her lips. Maybe so. The wind stirred, carrying the faint smell of sagebrush and sunrise. And for the first time in her memory, Tess felt something like peace settle in her chest, quiet as a foal learning its mother's breath. She turned to Sam, not with certainty, not with a rush of sudden love, but with an invitation. Simple, human, hopeful. Walk with me? Sam's smile warmed like amber caught in sunlight. Any place you want to go. And so they did. Two silhouettes drifting across the waking plains, their shadows growing long, like two stories finally learning how to share one path. Behind them, Blackthorn Ridge watched, a town reshaped by truth, a town learning, slowly, how to see the people it once feared. Ahead of them, the land stretched endless, open, forgiving, like a future unburdened by old ghosts. And in that gentle hush, somewhere between what had been and what would be, Tess understood something she had never known before. That hearts are not cages, nor punishments, nor burdens. They are small, wild, fragile creatures that bloom when finally held in gentle hands. The beast in the sack was no beast at all, just a girl once hidden in shadows, now stepping into the sun. And the cowboy who found her heart did so not by force, nor rescue, but by kindness, steady as the plains, and true as the morning. Their steps faded into the golden quiet, two souls stitched by understanding, walking toward a horizon that glowed like a promise kept. and to you listening by the warm hush of your own night. Remember this truth whispered from old wild lands. The world will name you things. Cruel things, wrong things, things shaped from fear rather than knowing. But your heart knows what it is. And someday, someone gentle will know it too, and they will walk with you, without asking you to shrink or hide. If this tale stirred something soft in you, leave a like, write a comment. Let these old stories keep traveling. And tell me, from what corner of the world are you watching tonight?